Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 270 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Wiley. And today's episode is on how to create a neurodiversity-affirming therapy space. And it is Friday, the 7th of June 2024, as I record this. So today's episode is a lot of fun because it's a very light episode. It's a very positive episode because it's all about making your therapy space, whether this is a waiting room at the mental health service that you're working at or might work at in the future, waiting rooms, your own therapy space where you do your own therapy, and any other mental health space which could see neurodiverse clients, for example, or autistic people, people with ADHD, and anyone else who falls under the neurodiversity bracket. Because as I talk about tonight, today's podcast episode, yes, neurodiversity does make certain things more challenging, not only the social and the emotional challenges that therapy brings and certain settings, but overstimulation. That's something that you never want in your therapy space. And when we consider that in clinical psychology, the entire point of therapy is to help people and decrease the stress. The last thing we ever want is to increase stress of our clients, and we never want to negatively impact the therapeutic alliance. But I talk more about that in the content parts of today's episode. I had a lot of fun with this, so I know you're going to love it too. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is a bit interesting. Could AI convince you to act unethically? ChatGPT has many uses, from cheating in a class to debugging code to somewhat badly apping the lyrics of famous songwriters. A lot has been said about the way AI is revolutionizing how we work and play. Whilst definitely not a mainstream practice, a few of us have also considered adding more social tasks to this list, perhaps turning to AI in moments of personal moral dilemma. Whether or not AI is capable of ethical decision making is a widely explored and hotly debated topic, where we find AI moral reasoning convincing, however, is less trodden. Recent work by A. Rahman, sorry I butchered that, and colleagues published recently in Scientific Reports finds that when presented with moral evaluations of social transgressions written by even a human or an AI, people tended to rate AI responses as more virtuous, intelligent, trustworthy, and rational rather than those written by humans. Naturally, this prompts further questions about whether AI's perceived superiority may lead us more willing to accept its potentially harmful moral guidance. Okay, so this I think is definitely food for thought, because I can see where this is coming from to some extent. Because when we think about humans generally, or to be honest, we all are, they're illogical, they're cognitive mices. You've got tons of the different cognitive biases, decision-making biases, the framing effect, and on and on and on. There's so many things that make us humans not that reliable, and we are open to emotional biases too. to those. So I can see why people might think AI is more rational and trustworthy and just basically better at this stuff. But the main problem with this, and this is something that I've looked into as an author too, because this is one of the problems with artificial intelligence and natural language models, is that all this AI is actually trained on biased data. This is trained on human data inputs. So AI will naturally inherit some of these biases. So AI is not this big, perfect code, calculative, logical thing. It really isn't. Like, yes, Bing Copilot. I love it. I've used it quite a lot. And sometimes I do just ask it questions. Like, for example, this week, because I was writing a short story that involved nurses, so I asked Copilot what would happen if a fatal car crash came in with a patient. What would a nurse have to do with these patients? So Copilot, brilliant. I really do recommend Bing. But would I ask it for moral advice, knowing it's potentially biased and probably knowing that it's only slightly better than humans? I don't think so. And I think that this is something we've got to explore. And if people are more likely to take harmful advice from AI, we've got to put safeguards in place. So the second one is, what would they want? Imagine that at the age of 50, your friend tells you that if they go on to develop dementia and then another physical illness that could be fatal if untreated, they wouldn't want that treatment. Then imagine that it's 30 years in the future and they are in that exact awful situation due to the dementia, which in this theoretical scenario is still uncurable, that they've suffered a substantial loss of cognitive function. Only now they're saying that they do want the treatment for the physical disease. Which treatment preference would you feel compelled to honour? Oh, now this is going to be interesting. Much bioethical ink has been spilled over which a preference should be respected in these cases. The researchers James Tommy and colleagues comment. The traditional bioethical, though, they add, is that when cognitive decline has been subessential, the pre-dementia decision should carry more weight. However, in this study of lay people's moral decision-making about others, the team found the opposite. Most participants felt that the later preference should be respected. Only when they themselves were the focus of the vignette were they more likely to insist that the initial pre-dementia treatment preference should be adhered to. Oh, okay, now this is brilliant. Okay then. This is fascinating because I have no idea what I would do. Well, to be honest, I think I would do the pre-dementia one, as heartbreaking as that would be. But then again, I've not been in this situation. Sure, I've been in this situation with family members to some extent. For example, my great uncle, he died of dementia, and my grandma, she had lung cancer. So both those situations, it was a long wait for us as a family for them to die, even though they were basically dead for at least a good few months before that. But their physical bodies were still there. So it was heartbreaking, it was awful, and it was really hard. Although, and also for my grandma's case, because she was quite old, my granddad said, well, even if this was treatable, I wouldn't have her go through the treatment because the chemo would probably kill her itself. So, because it would make her really ill. So, this is a really quite difficult decision that all of us would have to think about our own experiences, our own morals, and what the person would want. So it's very interesting food for thought and really interesting research. And I can't even give this much of a personal response because I don't know what I would pick because of my own experiences. If you have personal thoughts on this, then always feel free to contact me. So the final one is making mistakes easy. Despite mistakes providing many a learning moment, being wrong is often seen as negative or even punishable, an attitude that sometimes leads students to fear making mistakes at all. Previous research has highlighted the importance of a positive error climate, an environment in which recognizing and building from errors is an important part of the learning process. Positive error climates seem to increase motivation and achievement, whilst poor ones can lead to feeling helpless, anxious, and the fallout that comes with those negative feelings. In the British Journal of Educational Psychology, Gabrielle Stewie and her colleagues look at another little studied factor: how different kinds of errors climate affect students' relationships with their teachers. So, if you want to read more about that, then definitely check out the BPS Research Digest website. But this, I think, is definitely true because I know at my university, I've sort of just given up trying to tell people, oh yeah, like it's okay to make mistakes. You can learn from it. It doesn't make you a bad student. It doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't. It does not mean anything bad because none of us are perfect. We're all learning. We're all learning how to improve. We're developing our skills. Making errors does not make you a bad person or a bad student. It's simply life. But a lot of students, because that's just how the British education system is, that's just what happens, to be fair. Hello, like students are told that they need to be perfect, they need to know this stuff, and they can't afford any mistakes because, of course, errors and mistakes could be the difference between a good grade and a bad grade, a first and a high 2-1. I mean, like, no offense to any university students listening to this. If you are that concerned about getting a high 2-1 and a first class, in reality, it does not matter. It seriously doesn't. So please be kind to yourself. Most masters programs only requires you to like get a high 2-1 or a 2-1 at all. So it doesn't really matter. Please just be kind to yourself. And I definitely think the idea of creating positive ever climate is important not only in the workplace but definitely at universities and everywhere else though, because yes, if you make a mistake, that could be costly to some extent, but you're going to learn from your mistakes, you're going to grow as a person, and you won't make it again. And if you do make a mistake, if you feel more positive about it, and if you know you're not going to get punished, you're not going to slack probably. What you're actually going to do is you're going to go, right, I made this mistake. I know I'm not going to get shouted at for it, so how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? And it takes away the stress of it and the negative mental health outcomes associated with feeling helpless, anxious, and the fallout and the like. So it's just really important that we do talk about this and we realize that making mistakes is okay as long as we keep learning and trying to grow. So I really hope that you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. This week has actually been quite brilliant, especially towards the end of the week, because it's been wonderfully chaotic and wonderfully busy. Because on Tuesday, I actually spent the entire day working at Outreach, and I've been a session lead for the Outreach department as a part of the Future Human Day. So what this is basically I took the transhumanism session, that my outreach the apartment has, and basically what this is is that transhumanism is the idea that there's an intermediary form between us as we currently are, as humans without any upgrades, and a post-human. So basically a robot, to be honest. So what I would say is that basically this is a cyborg. So I gave those talks. I think I was definitely a bit stressed because I definitely stuttered more than usual. But it was a really good talk. The students liked it, and I got paid for it. I was always going to be quite happy. And then I struggled a bit Tuesday evening because I had a lot of social anxiety about an event I was meant to be going to tonight, and I had so much social anxiety. I basically had to go, oh my god, I actually can't go to this because since everything happened to me, I've been going, right, let's go to this, let's go to this, let's make sure that I keep living my life. But on Tuesday, I was like, no, I cannot go to this event on a Friday night. So I was texting my friend about it. According to my friend, I was beating myself up quite badly because of it, which is true. And then my friend mentioned, oh, you probably have a PTSD, right? Because of the traumatic event. And I was like, no, 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 don't be silly. Don't be silly. Of course not. I looked into it a bit more. I've got some podcast episodes saved up. Well, no, I've got some research that I want to make into podcast episodes in the future. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe I do have PTSD. And then I looked up the rates of PTSD among sexual violence survivors. And yeah, I mean, it's about 80%. Yeah, it's quite bad and quite horrific. So I'm like, yep, maybe I do have PTSD, which is why I wanted to do a nice light podcast episode today because I don't want to think about that stuff anymore. And then I had a lovely night with my friend Wednesday and I. So we were basically talking for 6 hours straight, which believe me, I do not do this with other people normally, which is why the bisexual mental health podcast episode actually came out midday in sort of Thursday at 5 a.m. because I was meant to do it when I got home Wednesday night because I thought me and my friends were only going to be hanging out for 3 hours. Nope, 6 hours later, an hour drive home because the motorway was shut. So that was the delay, which has been the past 2 days have been wonderfully chaotic with me doing a whole bunch of different projects because this weekend I'm off to Canterbury Pride. Then me and my friend we're also going out Sunday briefly. So I have no time to do the podcast beforehand. And considering I'm staying at my great aunt's tonight, so I'm leaving for hers at 7, I have less than 4 hours to record this podcast, edit it, upload it, have dinner, see my parents when they come in from work, and then I'm going to leave for the weekend. So lots happening. Life is really good. And of course, you'll be listening to this on the Monday. Well, I hope that you had a really nice weekend too. And a massive thank you for all the lovely comments that I've gotten this week about the recent bits and pieces. For example, I had a lovely comment on Instagram, not about the podcast itself, but about my books. So I was really happy about that because a woman was saying that they're really good. She's read a lot of them, and she's always really impressed with for how well they're written. And then I had a wonderful email from another listener. And because it's an email, I'm not going to read it out because I forgot to ask permission for that. But the general gist of it is that she found the podcast really useful, and the podcast has helped her to get even more excited and prepared for her undergrad degree in the UK. And she was also really grateful for me doing the bisexual mental health podcast episode. And I love emails, I love comments, and I always love the positive feedback because it makes me smile, it makes me feel good, and it means a lot to me that you guys do like the podcast and you do find it useful. So a massive thank you to those commenters. And I was also saying in the email reply, I like doing LGBT plus podcast episodes throughout June because I always try and do topics that we don't talk about enough. And I'm learning because of my child abuse, I was very much kept away from the LGBT plus community. So I'm still learning. And this is what me and my friends talk about like quite often. Sometimes they actually forget how new I am to all of this because they've been living and breathing their stuff for their entire life, but I'm really like new to this. So I make mistakes. I'm still learning. I'm still educating myself, and if I can educate other people at the same time, then that's a brilliant. And again, though, that makes me happy. So, as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So, you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley, or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Working with Children and Young People, a guide to clinical psychology, mental health, and psychotherapy. So this is a great sponsor for today's episode because yes, we're looking at autism and other different types of neurodivergence, but at least it's like some extent though, like when we talk about neurodiversity and neurodiversity mental health services, from what I've gathered, these do tend to see quite a lot of like young people and like children, especially when it comes to getting like diagnosed. So I'm understanding how to work with children and young people, especially the different professions that clinical psychologists work with, is going to be really useful knowledge. So that's why this great, really easy to understand book is a great book to read after today's podcast episode. Also, there were quite a few autism-based chapters, as well as other sections of the book that are going to be really useful for someone who wants to work with neurodiverse clients. So that is Working with Children and Young People, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you requested. Or you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. Or you can get it from selected library systems if you requested, like Overdrive, Biblioteca, and Baker and Taylor. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you wanted to become a patron and get tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology Wire podcast. Or you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Con Wiley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how to create a neurodiversity-affirming therapy space. So this is a great episode, so let's dive into it. Why is creating a neurodiversity-affirming therapy space important? I've already briefly mentioned in the introduction that when we want to support the needs of our autistic clients, we need them to have positive perceptions of us and our therapy space. This helps our clients, who often struggle with a social connection, to trust us and like us more. So this topic is critical, so we can have a good therapeutic alliance with them, and the therapy is more likely to be successful. In addition, Makavat and all 2023 did research on autistic clients, and the researchers found that a lot of autistic clients struggled talking in their therapy and integrating the strategies they discussed with their therapist into their lives. This was typically down to their neurodivergent specific needs. Furthermore, No Buy and All 2021 looked at the effectiveness of a group of interventions for adults with ADHD, and the researchers found that a lot of the clients felt burdened given the demands of the group, yet they found the sharing of personal experiences to be helpful. Overall, it's important to note that neurodivergent clients do find therapy useful, helpful, and it works. But group settings are difficult because of the stimulation, social skills, and the other challenges that being neurodivergent brings, as well as individual psychotherapy can be challenging too, for similar reasons. This is why a therapist being accepting, understanding, and willing to accommodate the needs of an autistic client is so important to the outcome of the therapy. Now we'll look at 5 ways how a therapist can create a neuro-affirming therapy space. Create a sensory-friendly space. There are certain things you just shouldn't do when you have neurodivergent clients, but you might do this for other clients without a second thought. There is generally no correct way, but there are better situations for different clients. For example, it is best not to have clutter, bright lights, music, a white noise machine, and other overstimulating things in your waiting room or your own therapy space. This reminds me of why my best friend does not like my bedroom and my parents' house too much, because I have really bright lights because they don't bother me as an autistic person, but I know the lights are overstimulating for them. Which is fine as we're close friends, but this wouldn't be ideal if this was a therapy space, because it would be too much for my friend. They would hate it, and it wouldn't help us form a therapeutic alliance at all. As a result, you can create a more neurodiversity-affirming therapy space by having a variety of fidget tools nearby, having a range of seating options at different distances to the therapist, and this includes something on the ground like a beanbag, as well as muted lights. All these options can help a therapist to create a more welcoming space where the client feels supported and not de-stressed by how overstimulating the space is. Never assume something related to a client's neurodivergence is a problem. So, if you're a long time listener to the podcast or a reader of my books, then you know I flat out hate the term problem because it's blaming, judgmental, and it is so medical model anyway. Therefore, when working with autistic clients, therapists should realize that being neurodiversity affirming means that you take the perspective that autism is not a problem and autism does not need to be treated. I think there are a lot of lessons for all mental health conditions there, because all autistic people might benefit from assistance in working through challenges that pop up because of a mismatch between their environment and the emotional and social challenges it causes. In addition, a lot of neurodivergent people find that their behaviours that help them cope have been historically pathologized. For example, stimming, which I only found out recently what it actually was because my friend kept mentioning it, and then I was like, I don't want to look like an idiot, so I'm going to nod along like I know what that means, and I'm going to Google it later. Thankfully, it was very useful to actually Google. So, stimming are the repeated motions and sounds that they do for self-soothing, like rocking, humming, and hair twirling, or pacing as my friend did the other night. These similar behaviours are critical for neurodivergent people because it helps them to have a sense of comfort, so these behaviours aren't a problem whatsoever. So please, do not think these behaviours ever need to be treated. Moreover, Anderson 2023 found that clients that went through applied behavioral analysis, a therapy that seeks to decrease neurodivergent behavior, universally felt negative about the intervention. And I mean, you would never feel positive about that intervention. Overall, when in a therapy setting, don't try to fix or cure autism because you shouldn't. It's wrong, and that is not a helpful idea in the slightest. Instead, focus on the difficulties and situations that are harming the client, and that will help you to improve the life of your client. You need to listen to understand. So a lot of psychotherapy modules involve some kind of fixed, very rigid structure, and cognitive behavioral therapy is a good example of this problem. Yet, the majority of the modules stress the need for the importance of making the therapy contextual and adaptable for the client. This is even more important for neurodivergent clients because each of them come up with their own unique stories, perspectives, and presentations, which is why I think these clinical populations are so interesting. Granted, I do come under these populations, but still, they are interesting. Anyway, the key for therapists in creating a neurodiversity-affirming therapy space is to listen to the accounts of their clients with a drive to understand, rather than jumping towards challenging what might be mislabeled as unhelpful thoughts or cognitive distortions, since it is critical for therapists to suspend their judgment and they should validate the client's outlooks on their life. One example of this in the research is Bab et al. 2021, who found a lot of autistic clients neurodiversity specific needs, like having a different experience to hunger cues or sensory sensitivities compared to neurotypical people, often got ignored by therapists. This is flat out wrong, and this should never have happened, because as a therapist, we're meant to listen, acknowledge, and try to understand how our clients see the world so we can help them. We should always try to understand how our autistic clients see and experience the world so we can support them and have a more effective course of therapy. Personally, I didn't actually expect to have anything personal to say about this podcast episode because my therapy wasn't really related to my autism whatsoever, except all the friendship trauma and the nightmare that is trying to navigate social relationships. But my therapist was very good at acknowledging, listening, and affirming my autistic identity because we did need to talk about it and we did need to focus on the friendship aspect and social challenges of autism because it does cause me a lot of psychological distress. Yet my therapist was so good at affirming this and not ignoring my autism that I didn't even notice she was doing this because it was so natural to her, and I seriously appreciated this. Overall, you can create a neurodiversity affirming therapy space by simply listening, respecting, and trying to understand your clients so they feel listened to. Never ignore what your clients say or are going through. Provide your client with multiple ways of communicating. As a result of autism being a massive spectrum, talking will be great for some people, like myself and my best friend, but it will not be for a lot of our clients due to not everyone can process and communicate effectively with words. Some clients will need pens, musical instruments, and even digital communication tools to have meaningful conversations. This doesn't mean that a client is bad, wrong, or messed up in any fashion. But if you want to create a neurodiversity affirming therapy space, then you need to give your client alternatives to speech. In addition, in education settings, visual supports can be very effective in helping autistic people to learn new information. Huinal 2021, as well as communicating whilst moving, is easier for people with ADHD too. On the whole, when it comes to creating a neurodiversity affirming therapy space, it's important that you give your client other ways to communicate, or you outright start at the beginning saying that it's okay if they need to stim, move about, or do anything so they can communicate effectively and self soothe too. Be kind to yourself and ask for feedback. None of us are perfect people, and there is no such thing as a perfect therapist or even a perfect therapy session. As a client, there are brilliant, extremely helpful, and really good therapy sessions, but I think if a therapist analysed a session, then there will be minor things to improve. That's just life, to be honest. Therefore, Bachelor 2013 showed that the therapist's reviews of therapy sessions, as well as the therapeutic alliance, can vary a lot. And if we think about it, this gap is likely to be even larger when the therapist and client have different neurotypes. This is why therapists should ask for feedback about how the client feels the session went, the relevance of the tools discussed, and then following up on the integration of these tools at the beginning of the next session. Doing these things helps to bridge this gap. However, most importantly, you need to remember that you aren't perfect, and as long as you're doing the best job you possibly can, then that's enough. You will need to be kind to yourself because all therapy work is challenging, but it is wonderful and rewarding too. It takes time to learn how to communicate, learn, and help neurodivergent clients because every client's needs are unique. So please be kind to yourself as you grow and learn. Conclusion. At the end of this podcast episode, we've looked at how to create a sensory friendly space. Never assume something related to a client's neurodivergence is a problem. How listening to understand, provide your client with multiple ways of communicating, and how to be kind to yourself and asking for feedback all helps to create a neurodiversity affirming therapy space. If you want to work with neurodivergent clients, then this is more important than any of us will probably ever know. It's important that we support our clients, improve their lives, and decrease their psychological distress. That is just the standard baseline of what clinical psychologists and therapists do. However, for neurodivergent clients, the social and emotional challenges of therapy might be even more intense and distressing than for our neurotypical clients. So it is imperative that we work to create a safe, calming, and affirming space where our neurodivergent clients feel safe, listened to, and they can bond up with us. The therapeutic alliance might be the most important factor in a therapy, and it is our duty to make sure that the alliance can be established as quickly and securely as possible. This is why learning how to create neurodiversity affirming spaces are so important. It's probably the difference between us helping or failing a client. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did because I just wanted something really light, something fun, and just something that's just very hopeful because creating a neurodiversity affirming space it's just nice. It's just positive, and you're doing something that might be rather small, but it's going to make a massive difference for your client. And I appreciate it. My friends appreciate it. This is just really, really good thing to do and just learn about. Because I mean, we don't really talk about it enough. To be honest, there is so much we could talk about that some things will just fall through the cracks, there. This is really good, and it's really important to talk about. And I completely forgot to say in the personal update, I am officially the president of my psychology society at my university because we're kick-starting it, which is why I just had to re-record that last bit. Because my phone decided to go mad because of our Teams chat. I think they want to do a visit to the Freud Museum in London some point next year. So, as a president, I'm going to have to deal with that at some point. But it's really good. I love the committee. We've got some great people on it, and I really am looking forward to working with them in the future. So, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode and find it useful, please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Working with Children and Young People, available in all the usual places. Or you can become a patron of the show if you want to provide the show with some monthly support at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you just wanted to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.